Good morning. Good morning. How are we all doing? Good. Did we get outside on some of those like 70-degree days? Yes. Wonderful. Awesome. Yeah. So exciting. Okay. So how is everyone feeling about the reading? About quiz? Feeling okay? Awesome. Starting to think about our projects? Yeah? Kind of, at least. Okay, and just a total sidebar thing. If this is yours, I have it. It came from last week. Done. Either it was yours or you just got a free water bottle. Okay, cool. So, perfect. And then we do have the training projects laid out again, so you can look at them at breaks. And they will always be in the Master Gardener office, which is like over here. So you can always look at them as well. Today we are going to be hearing from Cheralyn the whole time. There's so much amazing content to cover. She's such an enthusiastic presenter that it's great. Cheralyn Berry is our Family and Consumer Sciences agent. In a lot of extension offices, this is focused a lot more on cooking and nutrition specifically, whereas in our office, Cheralyn has taken this really kind of cool seed-to-table approach. So she also oversees Briggs Avenue Community Garden. Today's talk is going to be focused on vegetables, obviously, but a huge part of the focus is also like the story of vegetables, right? Vegetables, fruits and veggies, more than almost anything else we grow, have really, really strong cultural components. They come from different places. They're parts of different cuisines. Like you can really see the hands of people on these plants more than almost anything else we grow because they're so highly cultivated and so highly selected in response to cultures. So we've asked Cheralyn to kind of include a lot of that story, which she's an expert on, so that works really, really well. For really hands-on growing knowledge for a lot of these plants, we do have an optional afternoon tour of Briggs Avenue Community Garden later in the class schedule. I would also just really recommend that you join them on a Friday or Saturday morning, right? The best way to learn to grow veggies is to grow veggies, right? Like to get your hands in there to actually do it. So this will be a little bit more of a conceptual framework, and if this is a passion or an interest of yours, I really encourage you to get out to Briggs and learn from kind of some of the best out there. So with that, Cheralyn, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks. Welcome everyone, class of 2025. Oh my gosh, look at you all. Oh, I always say I love a new Master Gardener class. Bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. I call you guys baby Master Gardeners behind your back. You're interns. It's a total term of endearment. Yes, I'm an agent here, and the intrepid Dr. Ashley Troth is my colleague. We work very closely together because Master Gardeners are such a fantastic resource. And I'm so happy and proud that you all are going to become one of us. You're part of an amazing team, like the largest group of like cooperative brain trust, basically, of the office. Some of you are going to specialize in different things. Like when you meet the group, there's like the guy that does bonsai, the gal that does moss, the guy that specializes in, you name it, Asian vegetables. Like everybody gets to specialize, or you can just generalize. And I'm sure you've heard of the different opportunities so far that they get to volunteer for, one of which is Briggs Avenue Community Garden. So I do applied nutrition education, and that is seed to table. So I could talk all day about the vitamins you need and if they make your skin pretty or, collagen or whatever, or makes your muscles strong or your cholesterol low. But it doesn't really mean anything if you don't have access to those foods. So a big part of my work is putting a seed in the ground, growing whatever it is, and actually getting the food off of it. And then the to-table part is I manage the room across the hall, the food lab that you all have been enjoying your delicious snacks in, through Margaret Lee. Thank her, she's amazing. Best Chex Mix ever, I still dream of her Chex Mix. And that room I manage, and we are doing our first cohort of Extension Master Food Volunteer. Some of you know because you applied for both programs, and I told you if you got into this one, you can't get into mine because that's an embarrassment of riches. But that's a program where it's sort of like this group where you extend the reach of the agriculture program, the horticulture program through Ashley. You extend her work and serve the community through volunteership. Same thing with that program, only it's culinary and nutrition specifically. So applied seed to table. Briggs is a beautiful place. It's a big 45-acre property, an 8-minute drive away, and you can tour the place, learn all about it. I should have the date. I will look that up at the break. It's May something. We wanted to have it when it was warm enough for you guys to enjoy. We'll probably do a little cookout out there. What now?
I think it's April something.
April something? April something, May something. We'll get you the date before the end of the day. I meant to write that down, but I was busy getting a cup of coffee. But yes, please join us out there. What you would do is come to this class here, head straight out there, have lunch with us, and we cater to pretty much all dietary restrictions.
Yeah.
April 10th, thank you so much. If it rains, we'll have it here, but we'll go out there. We can have a beautiful lunch, and then we'll give you a tour of Briggs, and so you can kind of learn about not just the land and the project that we're doing out there, because there's an educational orchard, an apiary, and a community garden where we grow food for Durham Tech. And just like Ashley said, you know, the best way to learn is to put a seed in the ground. So this talk will have a little bit about growing vegetables, but you've already read the book, so me just repeating the book is not going to really be inspiring or, you know, interesting. It'll be all right, it'll be fun, we'll have a good time, but it's not the same as like, oh wow, celery did what? Like that is the kind of talk that we're going to have today. So this is a conversation. Please feel free to ask questions. If you're shy, come up to me in the break, or I also have a stack of cards. Well, I wrote them down somewhere, with my cell phone number on it. You can text me questions, and you're baby master gardener, so now you can have whatever you want at Briggs. So you can just come and see me, grow, learn, and just enjoy yourself. So we always say at Briggs, if you've never put a seed in the ground before, you're in the right place. So you don't have to know anything about growing vegetables. I always say you cannot teach enthusiasm and desire and service, like, you know, the desire for service. You can't teach that. But if you have that, we could teach you everything else. And this was a big class. A lot of people applied, and you all got in. So it's because of your service-oriented nature. So welcome. Okay, so vegetable peoples and places. So we're going to run through real quick in the beginning some of the stuff that you've seen before, just to kind of remind you a little bit about what vegetables need, and then we'll kind of like go into a little bit of a history and a little bit of nutrition and stuff like that about vegetables. Let's see if this works. It does. Okay, so we're going to talk about reasons to grow them, the things that they need, a little bit about the history of each one, the global movement of them across the world, because it is such an interesting story, and this is going to be seriously curtailed. And there's not all the crops that I wanted to put in here. Definitely nothing about fruit trees, not that much about grains, except for one. You know, there's so many things, so many stories, but we're trying to focus mainly on the stuff you might have a chance to grow here in Durham. If you were going to have like a little 10x4 plot, this is the kind of stuff you would put in there. So we're not going to talk a ton about field peas, because you need a field for that. But if you've got a field and you want to put in field peas, come talk to me. We could talk all about it. New world versus old world, and why we call it that, and how, you know, these things changed over. And so not all vegetables are included, like I was saying, but also a lot of the vegetables, things we call vegetables, are actually fruits. Pretty much anything with a seed inside of it is a fruit. So besides the argument about tomatoes being a vegetable and ketchup and pizza being a vegetable, don't get me started, there's also peppers and tomatoes and eggplants and stuff. Those are all fruits or berries of different bushes. So vegetables. So history is complicated, so this is extremely generalized. Again, we could talk all about it after class, but I only have 3 hours to download a bunch of information for you. So let's go ahead and crank through it. Okay, reasons to grow them. So we might be in a trade war worldwide, so these are very, very expensive. 2 years ago, the last time I taught this, food was expensive. I grew up, near the border of Mexico in Tucson, Arizona, and there are major Southwest, baby. But I could not grow old in the desert because it doesn't rain and I want to grow food. Here you just throw seeds and they just grow on their own. It's pretty low maintenance. But the food was really cheap there because of the international produce ports, Nogales, Tijuana. There's a few more along the Texas border where these massive produce ports come through. They can't sell it fast enough, and they're just off. They're foisting vegetables on people everywhere. And then you go to the grocery store here, and those peppers that are $1.50 each, conventional, not even organic, came through those same produce ports. You can see the same stickers that came from the same farms in Rio Rico. Most of them are also, there's a lot grown in the Central Valley of California. And so we pay for all the fuel to get it here. That's why food is muy, muy expensive. So local is best, of course, because there's nothing more local than your backyard or your community garden. During COVID, there was nothing so comfortable as me like opening up my, blinds in my drapes in my kitchen, and like I have all this kale and chickens in the backyard. I'm like, oh, we're gonna be fine, and nobody could get toilet paper. I had all that at least. So the consumption of these vegetables and fruits reduce diet-related diseases. So really, for most of the things we're going to talk about, we're not producing tons and tons of calories. We're talking lettuces, peppers, tomatoes, things like that. Those don't really put bulk on you. Those are more like grains and starches. So we'll talk a little bit about potatoes and how important those are. If you really do want to increase food security, plant more potatoes because there's a lot more calories per square foot of land that you can generate because of that. It's a good idea to understand the labor it takes to feed yourself. So once you start really getting in there and like digging up and you work real hard for that tomato, you don't ever look at a tomato in the grocery store the same. And I always consider every single night, encourage my staff to consider when you open a box of strawberries, like how many hands did those pass through before they get to you? But strawberries are special, berries in general, because the last person that touched those was the only person that touched those, and that was the person that harvested them in the field. So because they actually bring those boxes out in the field and harvest them directly into those boxes because they're so delicate. But just consider the hands that food has gone through, not only to respect the process, but also to clean it really well because it can be kind of gross. But that's a whole other talk. We can do a food safety talk another time. Okay, so community-based agriculture is super fun. As you well know, if you're new to Durham, welcome. If you've been here a long time, thanks for coming. You've seen a lot of changes, and they are putting up huge houses with about this much room in between them. A lot of them have HOAs. And they don't allow you to have gardens. So finding a community garden is a really wonderful thing because not only are you growing food, you have assistance with growing that food, but you also make buddies. So I think there's all this talk about the loneliness epidemic and us being on our phones and not really associating with people's. Community gardens are third places, and I highly recommend it because it's just a nice open place where lots of people come together, and intergenerational, interracial, interethnicity, everybody's welcome, and you just start to gravitate towards people that always show up on the day that you show up, and you end up becoming buddies. So it's a great thing. So connection to the earth and all the seasons. I would love anybody to guess if you know the answer, because you've heard this before. Don't raise your hand. But what's the only vegetable that you go into the grocery store and you see it and you know what season it is automatically? Can you think of it? Cherries. Okay, that's a good guess. Yes. Asparagus. Almost.
Vegetables?
No. What we would call USDA vegetables, things that aren't sweet. Corn, true. Okay, so you can get corn year-round. You can get these year-round. Cherries, they have extended the season on either side. That's a little bit better. Pumpkins, because they're usually front and center. And you walk in and you're like, oh, wow, oh my God, the kids need their outfits. You start to, that's it. Then you're like, oh yeah, it's fall, it's happening. And then, in a day and a half, it's Christmas. Like, that's the thing, because we have a global food system now. We figured out that, before you could only get cherries at a certain time, peaches at a certain time. There was only certain things you could get at certain times. Now there's a market for asparagus year-round. People don't even know that's actually a spring vegetable that's usually available for a month. You can get it at Costco right now in a big bag for $7.99. So, it's just available year-round because the Southern Hemisphere is in the opposite season as us. So we just have it shipped all over the world. So local is beautiful, but our modern food system is a miracle. It's amazing that you can get those things year-round. There's just more of us living on Earth because of the agricultural technologies that have been developed over time. So many vegetables and fruits have gone extinct. Years and years ago, during westward expansion and beyond, when people settled all over, European settlers, most of the country were farmers, and there were certain vegetables that were developed that were, we call them heirlooms because they were handed down. When, grandpa handed that down to the son, and then his kids went off and went to the city to go do work and didn't want to take care of the farm anymore, those died out. And so there are thousands of varieties of vegetables that have completely died out. And you go into the grocery store, there's you can get 3 different kinds of lettuce, 4 or 5 different kinds of tomatoes at any given time, but there are, it used to be thousands and thousands. So growing weird stuff is a great idea if you're into it. And please don't base the greenness of your thumb on houseplants. So there's a lot of people that I think don't even want to apply to this class because they're like, no, I kill everything. And it's like, yeah, because you had a houseplant in the dark and you're busy and you didn't water it, or you watered it too much. If you think that you don't have a green thumb because of this, like, plants want to be outside, just like a fish wants to be in a lake or an ocean. They don't want to be in an aquarium in your house. Putting things in a pot is really hard. So don't worry if you try. A lot of times people will start with tomatoes and the tomato dies, and it's like, okay, don't base it on that. You were trying to do calculus. We should start with addition. Some lettuce. Like a colored, like those are easy, in a cooler season, but you're picking the hottest season, most pest prone, and the most finicky of vegetables to start with. So if you feel like, oh no, vegetables aren't for me, just come see us because we can absolutely turn these thumbs green, okay? Okay, vegetable needs. If you have moss growing in your yard or grass won't grow in your yard, vegetables are not going to grow in that spot. You need 6 to 8 hours of sun a day. And if something's making a fruit, a pepper, a tomato, anything with seeds on the inside, it needs a minimum, like you may not even produce well if you don't have like 8 hours at least, because a fruit is an expensive thing for a plant to make, and it needs a ton of sunlight because that's the energy that it needs to literally trap air and water and turn it into starch. It's a miracle. It breathes in carbon dioxide, mixes it with hydrogen, with basically, H2O, and creates carbohydrates with the power of the sun. So it's amazing. It literally makes it out of nothing, but if you don't provide the sun, it can't do those reactions and it won't create fruit for you. Make sure that the water is close to the garden. This is something, because we start gardens throughout Durham. Not only do we manage breaks, but we start community gardens all through Durham and provide technical assistance, and you'll learn all about it during the tour and the lunch. Often people will say, oh, we're going to put it over here. And I'm like, where's your hose bib? Oh, it's on the other side of the building over there. And I'm like, no. You need to dig something over here or put the garden over there. Like, oh, no, we're going to fill up watering cans. There's no way you can carry enough water to keep it wet enough in the summertime. It's awful. So you want the water right there, and you want it potable. If it's your house, you can do catchment water, but for a community garden, I don't recommend, because you can't control people. And I always say, if you aren't comfortable with a 4-year-old taking a glass of that catchment water right there and, drinking it, then it really isn't a good idea to use it for community gardens, because you can't manage everything that everybody does all the time. They're going to do what they want to do. So anyway, crop rotation, you want to move things around, and we're going to talk about that, pests and things like that when we talk about certain vegetables, and awareness of what pests those are. You will hear this. People will come to you and say, my plants died, I sprayed them for bugs. And it's like, okay, what bug? Well, I don't know, it was bugs. Well, what did you spray it with? I just took a bottle and I mixed together these things and shook it and sprayed it on there. And you're like, okay. Next time, take a picture of the bug and send it to me, because it could be a good bug, and don't mix chemicals. And it's illegal to not follow the label. So, contact us first. I'll be giving them a card to your helpline. No, I'll help them. But just so that they can call and, and I've given my cell phone number. They can text me pictures of pests, because not everything is a pest. Sometimes there's a bug eating a bug that's eating your stuff, and you don't want to knock it out. So just be aware of things before you just start crop dusting things literally with chemicals. You definitely need seeds or seedlings. We have a really fun plant sale on April 12th. We have another one in the fall, and you can come and get free seeds, free compost. We do a plant sale. We're doing grafted tomatoes at cost, because they're exorbitantly expensive, but there's only one lab in the U.S. that still does it. So if you want a grafted tomato, which we'll talk about what that is, come see us. They're only $6. Soil amendments, you're definitely going to need that, because we've got clay soils. They're like a gigantic vitamin pill. We'll talk about that. And you definitely need fertilizer. So people just assume that compost is fertilizer, and it's not. It may add fertility to the soil, but you actually need fertilizer too. Okay, you've seen this before. We're not going to get too far into it. We've got mineral, organic, water, and air. So stuff and space, basically, we need that. And our soils are like a brick. Especially if you have new construction in your backyard, there's different ways that you can grow vegetables to kind of deal with that. But if you get of the mindset, and this is whether you want to do grass, you want to do orchids, you want to do ornamentals in your yard, if you really get the mindset of feed the soil, make the soil the most, wonderful spot. It's like the nursery for your baby plants. You want to make it comfortable, fluffy, lovely. Give the soil what it needs, and it will take care of your plants. So rather than looking at the plant as this individual that, you're like, oh, it's sick, I got to give it this, if you create an environment that it can thrive in, then it can pretty much take care of itself a lot of the time if you're putting the right plant in the right place. So make the right place for them, and it really does start with the soil. So start focusing on truly like feeding your soil rather than looking at plants as you're putting them there and you're just giving the plant something. If the soil is good, your plants will be good. Space and stuff. Okay, so you're gonna learn, I'm sure you've seen all this before. We have clay. So these are all packed really close together, and the way that you fix this is you fluff up the soil with organic matter. And then this guy tilling right here, don't buy one of these ever. No-till is the way you want to go. You do this one time in the beginning when you're starting. We have a couple of these you can borrow from us at Briggs. You borrow something like this, you don't own it, because you don't want to rip and mess up your soil. Once you start to build up that tilth, and you're going to top feed, you can, turn some stuff in, but this right here compresses the soil. It loosens it up to begin with, but then you've got all these subterranean creatures and going around eating things and making little tunnels and pooing under there, and worm poo, worm castings are one of the most expensive soil amendments that you can buy. So why would you destroy that? So if they're making little tunnels under there, that's the airspace that you need to like have plant roots go down and have water come through and things like that. So this you only do one time maybe if you're putting in a bed, and then after that you return it to Briggs, we clean it up and service it once a year, and then if you want to expand your garden, come borrow it again, but don't do this year after year. But this is, you want to add organic matter. So you've heard about pH, how important that is. So this is how low. Ooh, look at that. So a really 6.5, 7, this is really the sweet spot. If you look up here in the green, you see that like very slightly acid is where most of the vitamins and minerals are, well, these are all minerals, that are available in your soil that your plant can actually access. So if you're way over here and you're real acidic, you can have all of the phosphorus and nitrogen and sulfur available in the soil, but your plants aren't able to absorb it. So that's why we have you test your soil, and you really want it 6.5 or 7. So that's why we lime soil, but don't go liming and liming and liming without testing your soil first, because you're gonna bring it up here and then look, you don't have as many nutrients available. So that's why we test our soil before we start. Okay, you know about this, NPK, you want, by law, percentages have to be listed on here. Everything we grow at Briggs is organic, so for $50 you can rent a plot. If you're on our waiting list as a community volunteer, you can rent a plot. You can't just walk in and rent one because we always have such a large waiting list. But we do everything organic, so or on the organic list. We're not certified organic because we don't sell food. So there's no point in us paying thousands of dollars a year because we don't sell anything. So we provide for $50 all of your seeds. You have to buy most of your plants, or you can have whatever's left over from the plant sale. It includes all your fertilizers, pesticides that are on the OMRI list. Is it Organic Materials Review Institute? Or yeah, not research, it's Review Institute. And everything has to be on that list to be able to, nobody can just bring in a pesticide without clearing it first and putting it on plants, because we want, and that's why we go ahead and provide it for that cost, so that it's low cost for everybody to be involved. But NPK, I'm sure you've learned about this. N for your leafy growth, P for your roots, flowers, and seed development, and K for the hardiness to weather and disease resistance. So it's not just this, it's also the fertility of the soil. So, just make sure you feed the soil really well. It creates kind of a buffer because it's more of like a protected space, and plants can handle things better. So inorganic versus organic. The reason we do organic is because organic is, some people might be okay with conventional, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with conventional. It's just that almost nobody has a problem with organic. And if I've got somebody that's like really strictly organic in one area and somebody else is taking 7 dust and just hitting all their stuff with it, it could drift over onto the person who wants to keep organic. So we just do it all organic. It's what people kind of prefer. Most people that are attracted to gardening for themselves want food. But don't think that organic is that you don't spray if something's organic. if you buy organic food, it's usually sprayed like twice as much because there's not a lot of persistence in the environment of those chemicals. They break down faster, so you got to spray them more, just so you know. But there are some other practices that are more, kind of soil friendly and things like that in organic practices. Plants are not vegan, so I'm all for vegans, absolutely. I am not vegan. I butcher my own animals, so but plants are not vegans. The organic fertilizer, if you've ever smelled it, it smells terrible. That's because it is chicken poo, feather meal, bone meal, blood meal, leather meal, like all the stuff left over from meat production and leather production and things like that, because it's a way to turn trash into cash. There's a lot of things in the food industry that turn trash into cash. You ideally want the trash from one thing to be the food for another thing. And so they save all that stuff, pelletize it, and feed it to the soil and to the plants. It's lots of nitrogen because nitrogen is from proteins, and we'll get into that when we talk about beans and amino acids. So, all right, we'll get through this real quick. Ways to grow. If you've got lots of space, if you live in Durham and you have this, you've hit the jackpot. I hardly know anyone, unless you're up in Bahama, nobody's got that. But if you do, you got all kinds of space, and you could do like field peas or something like that, which we won't really talk a lot about because most people have this. They're doing that. And if you want to do a raised bed, talk to me first. Don't put anything underneath it, like landscape fabric. Don't use treated lumber. But again, before you do any of this, we will help you. We will absolutely make this completely fertile, but just don't Google stuff and go willy-nilly. Talk to us first, because we specifically have a lot of experience in this in the Piedmont. And if you don't have a lot of space, there's containers. So a lot of times HOAs won't let you do this. But something like this, they tend to be okay with as long as it's not in your front yard, because you're not putting this in the ground and it's technically something that you could break down. Yes?
And your plant style has a lot of.
Yes, so thank you. Thank you so much. So our plant sale, actually, if you have itty bitty spaces like this, we have dwarves. So we specialize, we have a lot of different kinds. We have I think 22 varieties of tomatoes this year. But we also specialize in dwarves, things that are real small. And we'll talk about what those are throughout the vegetable talks, that you could put a ton of stuff in here, or they work really well in containers. So it's hard to grow an indeterminate tomato that gets 12 feet in a container this size, but you could absolutely grow a dwarf and get a really good production off of a dwarf tomato. So we'll talk about what that is. If anybody's familiar with the NC Tomato Man, he wrote Epic Tomatoes. He used to live in Raleigh, and we'd go over there like once a year. He grows dwarf seeds for Victory Seed, and he's so kind to give us a lot of our dwarf seeds every year. He's a beautiful human being. He's now in Asheville, unfortunately, because he's 4 hours away from us. But he used to grow, I don't know, like 500 plants a year in his driveway like this. And he's like this breeding expert, fantastic human. Check him out. Epic Tomatoes. I think that there's one in the library that you can look at and check out. So, great guy. And does he have YouTube? I know he's got an Instagram.
Nobody's
all of that.
Yeah.
Is all of them?
He's got YouTube, he's got Instagram.
Awesome. Yes, look him up if you're curious about tomatoes. Yeah, NC Tomato Man. Specifically NC, because if you're looking up tomatoes and it's just, they're in California or Arizona, or so, that's it's not just about when you grow tomatoes, it is the environment that they're in, where you want to plant them so close together so they shade the fruit and all. Totally opposite here. You want to space them out so they dry out, like it's a different world. Yes?
Fun fact, he's the guy who introduced Cherokee Purple.
That's right. He was the Cherokee Purple breeder, so he's so amazing. Okay, now into the history and global movement. We got through the little bit of what was actually your book. So we were all hunters and gatherers. We're going to talk a little bit about that. There were multiple centers of agricultural development without these people even knowing each other. So how that transitioned into that, we'll talk about it for a little bit. And then there was the Columbian Exchange, which, this is controversial now. When I was a kid, everybody, celebrated Columbus Day. Now, of course, because people are much more, hip to what has happened in the past, and, from many sides, it's it wasn't actually the greatest thing, and it's great that we also have Indigenous Cultures Day as well. So, but the Columbian Exchange, honestly, when it comes to food crops alone, there are literally more of us existing on Earth because of this. We wouldn't have as many calories available to us. Plus, could you imagine Italian food without tomatoes? Or Thai food without chilies? There's so many things, the ways that we have developed things over time foods that wouldn't exist if this did not happen initially. And then Old World versus New World, we'll talk about what that means. Okay, so these are the primary centers of the origin of cultivated plants. So you can see, like, really this had to do mostly with starches and pulses, because this didn't have much to do with like tomatoes and peppers and things like that. It did a little bit, but the reason that people settled down in these areas and started to do, you can see most of them are by water. This has some large lakes and rivers and stuff here, and by a lot of water. Basically, everybody was moving all the time, following animals for meat and milk, and they were following. And as they would pass through places seasonally, they might harvest something by a river, and then they would know as they passed by. Maybe that plant wasn't there all the time, but during a certain season, it was there, and so they would harvest from it then. And then in the case of something like squash, which is one of the oldest cultivated plants in the world, the seeds were really huge. And you ate them too, because they're actually one of the most nutritious parts of the plant. Same thing with melons, that's where all the protein is. And so you'd hold on to those seeds, stick them some other places, and they would grow. And so after a while, people figured out, hey, if I stay in this one spot, there's actually enough food for me to chill out right here. And then, they could actually, it also had to do with bringing animals, being able to kind of pen them in and cultivate them as well. So these, besides just the starches and pulses that were available, and that everybody learned about, wheat over here in this area, the Fertile Crescent, where like half of wheat, because of the flowing of the rivers, the flooding of the rivers, the Nile, you would end up with, tons and tons of wheat, and they would ferment half of it for bread and half of it for beer, because beer was safer to drink than water. The Americas, like the Europeans that came over and had a bunch of apples, like apples were what people survived on, apples and pawpaws to begin with, because of Applejack. You would just ferment tons and tons of apples because people were like, not hammered, but they were drinking alcohol all day because it was safer than water. When something is populated with yeast and bacteria that's beneficial to you, it populates out anything that was in the water that could possibly kill you. So alcohol was a big part of, it also has a lot of calories too, because beer is liquid bread, basically. It's the same ingredients with a lot more water. So all of these areas developed around, like here we're talking potatoes, and here we're talking corn, and here we're talking wheat, and here we're talking rice. These were all where the native plants were that people, they were like natives there, and then they ended up pulling them around and creating land races out of them, which is where you take a native plant and then you start to kind of like create almost like a little area where that particular one grows, and then you pick like the most delicious and juicy kernels of corn, and you grow, you breed that one with another one. So like Ashley said years ago, and it still sticks with me, is that people think of fruits and vegetables in the grocery store. You walk in and go, ooh, it's so natural. There's nothing natural about, the original pepper, and then now this big, boxy, beautiful, shiny, perfect bell pepper. That wasn't in existence till the 1920s, and it wasn't that big and it wasn't that perfect. So, just keep in mind, these plants did not start off this way, and a lot of them weren't even on this continent to begin with. So, okay. So another thing to keep in mind as we're looking at, like, this is the olden times before people were really moving. I mean, they were moving around, but this is when they started to stay put. There's always migratory people through all of this.
What time period are we looking at here? From that last, what time period is this?
Oh, this is like antiquity. This is before. This is people like basically putting petroglyphs in caves. This is like long, long, long ago. Before it was Europe and Africa and the Middle East. So this is just after people had. They were transitioning. I should have a year on here, but I don't. This is like around the starts of written language, when people were like actually starting communities and things. But I will get you the date of this. I'll look at that guy. It's been a while since I looked at this slide. So yeah, I'll get you the date on this.
Actually, I just have a question.
Yeah.
It's like not really related, but it's related. I'm noticing that there's this sort of central aggregation around the Mediterranean, right? But Africa really isn't represented here at all. But like that really was the center of where like agriculture was started, and how we see like the agricultural patterns that we have here in North America right now. Why is that just blank?
So Northern Africa and the Horn of Africa, these areas are where a lot of the, like where plants have found to be native. Like for instance, like okra from here, some of the melons and beans from here. So this was a huge area here of where you go back and find, like when they're trying to find the originations of some of these plants, because it's like prehistorical seeds that they found, they went to these areas to try to figure out, okay, where exactly were these native to? Where did they originate from in the beginning? So this was a huge area of plants where people settled down first and started to, so yeah, this is a huge area of Africa where plants were developed and actually, yeah, so there was a lot of like hunter-gathering going on in here, but when they went back and researched where the origination of certain crops that we actually eat today, this is the main area where they were. So I can look and see what they said about this area here, but there was a massive, there was a lot of movement from the crops here up through here, because really this is all the same, this Mediterranean area, because it's hot or warm most of the year, dry, and then you can add water when you need it. It was a very easy place to grow crops, because if you don't have a super, super wet area, but you can choose, or that there's periodic times that water comes in and out of an area, then you can grow a lot of crops because there's not as many pests. You'll know that from when you garden here, that like it's very difficult sometimes when we have a really wet summer, that there's blights that knock everything out. But growing things in an area like northern Mexico where it's really, really dry, but if you have the ability to have periodic rainfall or access to an area that you can flood, it keeps the plants pretty safe from those sorts of things, and then you're just watering the base of them. So things are always close to water. There are definitely some areas that are tropical for sure, and the plants that we'll talk about where they come from these areas will demonstrate kind of how they grow here. A lot of plants are perennial in certain areas, grow year after year after year, but we grow them as annuals here because we have a time of cold. But I'll go back to this paper and see what they said about this area, but this is a gigantic area, and in fact, this is not accurately represented, this map, because Africa is much, much larger. So this land area actually is much, much larger than Mexico, or at least the area that was represented in Mexico. So, yeah, there's just a lot of historical maps that they try to make everything fit on one and then diminish the size of Africa, but Africa is massive. And like North America fits like this in Africa, it like fills in there. You can see some, just Google them, like modern maps of like, okay, where does South America fits like right here inside of Africa? It's not the same size. So this area is actually very, very large. This is the only map I could find with those on it though. So, okay, so this is a touch more accurate because you can see how large this is in comparison to Europe. Like how big Europe is compared to Africa. Africa is actually much, 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 much larger. So because of this water and then some rivers that came down into Egypt, and Egypt is dry, this was a like cradle of, this is the primary area where like wheat, fermenting wheat to make beer, they didn't call it beer, but a safe fermented beverage. This is really where the start of agricultural development began, was really Egypt, the different rivers around here, and then I wanted to show you the silk routes because they talk about silk and spices, but these were all the trading routes. And so you can see when we talk about how the different vegetables have moved across the world, that they moved across the world because not only were they were trading all kinds of goods. And it wasn't just foods, it was also seeds. A lot of seeds were used as, we grow them as vegetables now, but they were used as medicines, especially in the case of like celery and parsley and that sort of family. But if you look at this whole area, it did not have any, it had no, except for eggplant, it had no solanaceous crops, no tomatoes, no potatoes, no no tobacco, none of those existed when this was Persia back in the day. So yeah, these were the names of antiquity, but then they have some more kind of modern names here.
Eggplant is old world?
Eggplant's Old World is the only, yeah. And it makes me think like, when everything was like one, whatever it's a Pangea, that how is there a solanum here that we eat now, but it's like super, super old, yeah. Okay, Columbian Exchange. So, Columbian Exchange there was a trading of food. There was a trading, well, not really a trading of livestock. We basically brought the livestock over to the New World. Definitely an exchange of ideas. Diseases for sure, mainly linked to livestock. So most of the diseases that Europeans and everybody in the Old World that ended up coming over were exposed to all kinds of diseases, and a lot of them were related to living close to animals. Because if you look back, way back in the in the day, it would be you would live basically either above your animals in a 2-story situation if you had a little bit of money, or you lived in the same unit with your animals, and so you're sharing air and floor and food and all of those things. And so our exposure and very close proximity to animals it caused a lot of diseases. But Europeans and people all across the Silk Road were, because those animals were traded at that time, pigs, horses, cows, sheep, especially goats. We were exposed to those for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years, and people were kind of used to, people were living much closer together because there were more cities and things like that in the Old World, where in the New World, there really weren't. There were some civilizations in present-day Mexico and South America, but they were not exposed to any of these diseases or any of those animals. So if you think of like horses, like all the ruminants, sheep, cows, all of that. I think there were like, was it alpacas? Alpacas and guinea pigs. There weren't that many animals, especially ones that were being domesticated in the New World. So let's see. Religions for sure. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff about religions in here. I'm not a religious person, but there's some like kind of funny and cute things about some foods mixed in with religions with this. Definitely exchange of people. And many sailors followed Columbus. We call it Columbian Exchange because he was like not the first one, because Leif Erikson apparently was the first one. There's arguments about that. But this is the one that we all know about because this is the one that we've learned about forever. But there were lots of other people, especially Spaniards, Portuguese, and then later on the English and the French, and everybody came over, discovered the New World, and tried to claim chunks of it and fight over it and things like that we all have learned about in history. So we're going to talk about the food, about that sort of thing. So here are the first 4 routes that he took. He was looking for, and we'll go over a slide of like what exactly he was looking for, what exactly he found. But really, they were trying to find a way around so they can get to India without having to go over the ground. You saw that silk route, the silk routes or the spice road, rather than trying to truck everything across, because also people were in constant wars and capturing people and fighting to control those routes. It's not like you could just truck along. People are you come into their territory, that territory might be at war, and they're fighting for that route if they can use it, because it was an access to money and resources. And so it was not always safe if you wanted to take your, mule-pulled wagon and take your, pelts that you were going to go trade for cinnamon, and you're trying to get it across to India. That was very precarious. But trying to find a way specifically on one boat with everybody that you controlled, that you had space underneath to come and bring things back, and you were bringing things to trade, to try to find a way around to India. So that's why that's what he was looking for, and he found mainly present-day Cuba. So this was the original one, and these are the 4 paths that he initially took. But you can see just the Spain and Portugal, they really did invest a whole lot in their navies to be able to do these resource finding missions. Okay, so why don't we start with some of the warm season crops, the majority of which were found in the Americas. They also happen to be the favorites and tend to be the most expensive in the grocery store. So we're going to kind of tie these things together so that you're able to grow these, but then also kind of know why they came about. So they're warm season in the Piedmont. A lot of these are perennial though. If you grow them in the places where they're from, they're perennials because they grew there. A lot of chilies are perennials that grow for 10, 15 years depending on the type. They need fertile soil. They're very heavy feeders, and they did grow very well in the Old World in places that it was very warm, because These tend to be pretty disease prone, and basically we took them from the new world and brought them to the old world where there was no exposure or pests for these yet. These are full of blights and bugs. We could get into that. If you want to grow tomatoes, talk to me. They like frequent water with a dry out in between. Almost all of these crops like that. So they like rich soil that need to be fed a couple times a season. They are the most popular garden vegetables except for that guy. That guy is most popular in certain cultures, almost inedible in other cultures. It just depends on where you're from. And then crop rotation is absolutely required with these because they are so disease prone that soil diseases build up if you plant these again and again and again in the same spot. This is why I'm an expert in those, because in a community garden you cannot make people not grow tomatoes in the summer. So we're dealing with soil that has grown tomatoes for like 11 years straight. So definitely talk to me about disease prevention and integrative pest management. Tomatillos, ground cherries, and tobacco is not included in this talk, but they're really fun to grow. Not really tobacco unless you smoke, but you know, if there's a lot of native cultures that will use tobacco for religious reasons. And then all of them are New World except for the eggplant. Peppers and chilies. If any of you are hot pepper heads or wannabe, your person, when you talk about specialization, is Lalitri. So Lalitri, she's a wonderful, very smart person there's certain people that can touch hot peppers and they will sprout. Yeah, definitely, yes. And so you well know that once a year we grow an international hot chili row at Briggs, and we go sweet to the hottest in the world. And we do it different types every year. And if we meet somebody and they're like, oh, I'm from Burma, I'm like, ooh, bring me some seeds. And we'll like grow their Burmese peppers with them like on the label, and we talk about how they use it and the history of that pepper and that sort of thing. But we try to change it up. The only one that we grow every year that's our reference pepper and is boring is a jalapeno, because if you're standing in front of the jalapeno, you know how hot things are. Because before I grew that, people would go, how hot is this? How hot is this? So now you just start from sweet, and you're like, oh, jalapeno. And then you're like hotter, hotter, hotter. It progressively gets hotter until it's like, whew, there's only certain people that like the super hot peppers and come every year in the fall to see me and are now in your class. So I see you. Okay, so, all right. Columbus was looking for India, which is the name Indian and where we get the name indigenous, but it was not India. And he was looking for pepper because it was worth its weight in gold, basically, at that time, was pepper. Not only because it was like spicy and people liked the kind of piquant flavor of it, but it also, if meat was going off a little bit before refrigeration, you could really kind of hide the flavor. It was also a little antibacterial, so if you smeared it all over like an animal that you had recently killed and were going to butcher. This is how people who field dress animals, if they kill a deer and they got to come back to it tomorrow, they strip it, take the guts out, and cover it in pepper, and no animals want to touch it, so you can leave it there for a day. Anyway, so pepper, huh?
Do you mean peppercorn?
Well, no, peppercorns, yeah, so, yeah, it's like Piper nigerum or something like that. Anyway, round black pepper, absolutely, yeah, grind it up, yeah, it's spicy. So that was the only real spice. Also looking for cinnamon, these were very, very valuable things, and did not find it, but found Merca. So, so he found capsicum at the time, because he really was in South America. He found ají or chiles and called them peppers because they were spicy. Different spice, it activates different receptors in your mouth, but that's why it got the name peppers. So he found people that had been breeding peppers for over 5,000 years, like since before written language, just forever and ever they've been. So the varieties that you'll find all of these varieties at Briggs. There's different kinds. Capsicum annuum, capsicum chinense. Chinense are all the super hots. So not all of them are super hots, but if you find a super hot, it's a chinense. And then C. pubescens or pubescens, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And these are the ones, if it's like ají amarillo or lemon drop or any of those South American, or ají mango, that's that one right there. You know that it's, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. That's Bacatum is the one that are the ajís. The pubescens are more rare. They have black seeds and they're actually hairy. And they have purple flowers. We always try to grow at least one of those at Briggs, so you can see, we grow like 5 different species, and there's like 30 different varieties, so come see them. So It is the oldest cultivated crop, and it's perennial without frost. So if you have a pepper plant that you love and you're like, oh, I want to grow this next year, dig it up, stick it in a bucket, throw it in your garage. It'll go dormant, and then you can throw it back in your yard. You can also talk to Lalitri about this, banchi. So she will often come and get a few pepper plants from us and do bonsai chili plants that you can grow small with the full-size peppers on them. She's the one with the hot fingers. Some of these, the super hots and everything, they will take like 2 weeks to 4 months to sprout. And she's like, with her little spicy fingers and makes it happen. I wouldn't even try. Like, I have a hard enough time getting a habanero to sprout. She's amazing. So every year I call her and go, what do you want for your seed bank? And bring me random things. And that's what she does. So I don't question her methods. And so multiple areas of domestication. There were different areas of domestication, sort of like some other crops we'll see, where these people may have never met these people, may have never met these people, but there were chilies available in that area, and they developed and were breeding their own peppers and developing into different species, all at the same time without ever meeting. And the reason this happened, they're guessing. Nobody truly knows, because nobody from back then is alive today, and they spoke completely different languages. It's because birds lack the ability to taste capsaicin, which is the stuff that burns you. And so the plant actually developed that response so that when mammals are chewing on it, it burns you, and you're like, ah, and you leave it alone. But birds come in, so good. And then they fly, and they drop a perfect like little fertilizer package around a seed far, far away from where they ate it. So this is why scientists guess that there were these multiple areas of development. Okay, so when you turn to Europe, they called them peppers for spice. The Spanish adopted them pretty readily, and Portuguese sailors after that spread them to Africa and Asia, because the Portuguese were like amazing sailors. So for trade, the Portuguese had the run on the game for a very long time. Major competitors. Okay, so these are different varieties. I want to point out this one. We always grow one of these at Briggs. This is a chiltepin or chiltepequin, depending on where you're from, and it was originated in, they think, central Mexico. These grow all over the state of Sonora, which is the state that borders Arizona, and I grew up eating this chili. This is a progenitor chili, so most chilies started like that, itty bitty, teeny tiny, whether they were spicy or not, and birds got a hold of them and flew around and dropped them. And so this was a spice. People from those cultures that we were looking at, they all ate them every single day. And just like any other crop, maybe one of these grew a slightly bigger or slightly sweeter or slightly more, whatever the case. It grew yellow or it grew white. And people were like, wow, that's interesting. Let me save the seeds from that and plant it again. And so that's how we manipulate things, is that there will be some random genetic, anomaly with one of them, and you save those seeds and plant it again. Or when we figured out that you could, cross-pollinate them and get traits that you like. So all the peppers that you see, and every pepper you've ever eaten, that was its kind of common ancestor. But yeah, there's a big representation. This is those rocoto peppers. Those are the ones that are the pubescens peppers, and they have this really cool growth habit, and they're hairy. They have black seeds. They're pretty hard to grow. I try to grow at least one a year, or Lalitri starts it for me. Often it will get blight and die, and it breaks my heart. But we try it. So.
Are they spicy?
Yes, they're probably 5 times as spicy as a jalapeno. Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is gonna throw you off or not, but
No.
so I watch a lot of English cooking shows.
Yeah.
And when they say you need to cook with a chili, what variety of chili are they talking about? Do you know?
I don't know. I would bet you if they were cooking with a chili, it would probably be like something that's most used in Indian cooking because of, Great Britain at the time, the UK, basically took over India and dominated and colonized India. That's why, British cuisine is terrible, but you can have some of the best curries you've ever had in your life if you go there, because, that basically they took that there were a lot of immigrants from India, and then people developing their own taste for that there. So that would be my guess.
Okay.
I always look as like on Great British Baking Show. Sometimes they do it and I look, and sometimes it's something that's like similar to a Serrano or something,
Yeah.
but I think that they do have a wealth of chilies available to them if they have a lot of Indian groceries. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's usually a long red chili,
Mhm.
which is like a generic name is what they call it.
Yeah.
Or like a Thai, similar to a Thai bird chili.
Yeah. So this right here, this guy right here, and this guy right here. There's so many different types of chilies that grow like this. The frutiscens or frutiscens, the one that makes Tabasco grows upright. Chili de audible grows like down, but it could be any level of hot. There's some of these that grow 1.5 foot long, Thunder Mountain longhorn peppers. It's really, just by looking at them, you can't always tell because there's a lot of different growth habits and they'll have differing levels of spice. It's really hard to tell just by looking at them. I know because I took some from I have a vast chili collection in my house and I had some dried ones that I always make this salsa out of, and I grabbed some quickly and made salsa here and used the same recipe and realized that I grabbed chile de árbol rather than chile japones, which are Japanese chilies, and blew the mouth off of everybody in class last weekend. I was like, oh, sorry, you guys. But yeah, so it really does vary, even though a pepper can look exactly the same. But if you ever pick up a pepper and has blisters on the outside, that is a super hot, and it will be spicy twice, if you know what I mean. It is very, very hot. She likes them, but there's certain people that love them and will come and denude the plants in September when we open that up for the public. But anyway, so let me keep cranking here. All right, into tomatoes. The calculus of growing vegetables. It will break your heart because you wait so long for that tomato. Definitely talk to us if you want to grow tomatoes, and don't totally let your heart be broken. If these ever get sick, rip them out and put another one in. As Peter Bent in the back will tell you, if you start growing vegetables, you will become a brutal killer of vegetables that are sick so that you have everything else stay alive in your garden, because these girls, they can be typhoid Mary and wipe out all the other solanaceous crops in your garden if they're sick. Okay. So tomatoes, the wild ancestors started in South America. And so, so down here in South America, for those who can see, I don't want to block it. Okay, so, and they moved north and were cultivated through Mexico, Central America. There was all of this movement. There was some trading going on with hunters and gatherers for sure. The Aztec culture consumed them daily. Great health, I'm sure. And then when Hernan Cortez come over and captured Tenochtitlan, which was like their big capital city, he ended up taking tomatoes back to Spain. So Spanish and Italians grew pomodoro first, but they grew them ornamentally because they looked like belladonna, which this family is the deadly nightshades, basically. So if you eat the leaves, they're glycoalkaloids like solanine and tomatine that will make you sick. They won't kill you if you eat them right away, but you can get physically ill from this like munching down. That's why the leaves are very, very, very bitter. They just taste awful. And so they call it pomodoro, which just means golden apple, which means they probably had yellow varieties that they got first, which is like pomodoro sauce is golden apple sauce, basically. So sailors, probably Portuguese sailors, traded tomato seeds in the Caribbean and the Philippines. And then the English were the last to adopt its use. They primarily, as you know, if you could remember, I'm sure you've seen them in history books, conservatories. So very rich families would have conservatories, which were like beautiful greenhouses that were built on the side of their like palatial mansions and palaces, or just country homes. And this is where they grew things like these solanaceous crops or like a pineapple, something because it stayed warm in there all the time. And they were traded into India, Middle East, and North Africa. They really spread across the world. So when people think of the Mediterranean region, they think, oh, Spain and Portugal and Greece and Italy, but it's all of northern Africa too. So when people talk about the Mediterranean diet, really look that up. There's a lot of similarities in the foods and crops that are available in this area. And also the length of the life of the people that live there. If you've ever looked up the Mediterranean diet, that it's a blue zone where people live a really long time. It's because of their dietary and cultural practices. But this includes Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, all of these places too. Tomatoes came to the colonies in 1710, and it is America's favorite garden vegetable. Again, come see me before you want to grow them. Okay, habits of tomatoes is really important to know. We can talk about it really at length when you come and see us at the plant sale. So we have indeterminate, determinate, dwarfs, and then grafted is its own little thing. So when you've seen indeterminate tomatoes, the way to remember indeterminate is indeterminate. You cannot determine how big it's going to get. These are your 12-footers that you have to put a stake or do the Florida weave where you like put a lot of stakes and you weave in. There's a lot of different ways to stake these up. But if you get one of those little tomato cones, it will laugh at you. It will grow out the top and like, ugh, and like lean the thing over. Those tomato cones are for determinate tomatoes. So indeterminate tomatoes grow, and they flower throughout the season, and they put off fruit throughout the season. So if you have a family and you just need a couple of tomatoes for dinner, this is the guy for you. Determinate tomatoes are a little bush. They really do prefer like a stake or one of those little cones, but a stake works great. And all the flowers, they grow like a little bush about this tall to this tall, and they put off all the flowers at the same time, and then they fruit all at the same time, generally speaking. And that, pretty much all of the tomatoes you see in the grocery store are determinate tomatoes because they all fruit at the same time. You can send one crew through the entire field. They'll harvest everything at the same time when it's green and store it at like 55 or 60 degrees until you're ready to buy it. Then they gas them with ethylene gas and send them all over the United States. Yes?
How do you determine which one is indeterminate and which one is...
You can Google it. We would never sell a plant to you without telling you first. So you can Google it. So this is good. Like if there's a certain, like San Marzano tomatoes, just Google it and it will tell you whether it's determinate or indeterminate. But usually the tab, if you buy a plant from here or you buy a plant from us, or usually like in Lowe's or Home Depot or the big box stores, it will tell you whether it's determinate or indeterminate. Yeah. And most heirloom tomatoes are indeterminate, but it varies. So if you're a canner, a determinate tomato is great for you because you're going to harvest 50 pounds of fruit on the same day, knock it out with your neighbors, put it up and share. Now, then there's dwarfs, which are good for us city hicks that have, the space of the size of 2 of these tables to garden because it's a little guy. It grows the height of a determinate tomato, but it has the flowering and fruiting habit of an indeterminate tomato where it puts off flowers some of the time and then fruit some more time. So it's like more where you can pick from it throughout the season. So that's what a dwarf does. Now, a grafted tomato could be any of these, but primarily speaking, it's almost always an indeterminate. And what it is, and you're going to learn this if you're interested in fruit trees or grafting of any kind, a rootstock, like they basically experiment by growing tomatoes or any other plant. They'll grow some tomatoes and then expose them to diseases or don't water them or what have you. And the ones that demonstrate, they might have a terrible tasting tomato, but blights won't touch it, bugs won't touch it, it grows in total drought. And so what they'll do, even if the tomato tastes terrible, they'll grow that tomato plant, cut it off, make a little split in it, and then graft in the delicious tomato that you want. So now you get a delicious tomato that bugs don't want to touch it, blight won't touch it, and it can survive drought, and then you get the tomato that you want. And that's pretty much every fruit you've ever eaten, just about, at least if it came from a tree, is a grafted tree. And you'll learn about that in another class. We won't go into it because we're going to run out of time. Potatoes, oh my gosh, look at this diversity. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. So this makes me so happy. This is thousands of potatoes available in Peru. Fantastic, beautiful, so many micronutrients and phytochemicals available. I mean, just look at that one, like it's multicolored, it's so amazing. But this, like Americans would not love that because you gotta scrub it and get the funk in between it, and you probably have to soak it in clay to not make it bitter. But if you ever get a chance to eat weird stuff, it's a great idea to do because just the genetic diversity of it, I love weird food. Okay, purple peas, stuff like that. Okay, potatoes, native to the Andes Mountains. Okay, glycoalkaloid toxins. You have seen these and may have eaten them before. Glycoalkaloids are what make belladonna or deadly nightshades deadly, okay? And if you have ever gotten a potato and it's green, it's developing glycoalkaloids. In fact, when I go to a grocery store and I buy a bag of potatoes, they're always in like a brown bag so that they're not photosynthesizing when the light hits them, but pull up the first bag and get a bag underneath it because the bag on top, unless it's a store that's like cranking through, you don't have to worry about it like a Costco or something. Like anywhere that's got a high volume of purchase, you don't have to worry about it. But if it's like a specialty grocery and it's some specialty potatoes, like make sure that you look at them and make sure that they're not starting to develop because it'll be like a pretty display and they're $8 a pound or whatever and you want to try them. make sure they're not green, because they've been sitting there for a while under the lights and they'll start to photosynthesize, and you don't want that. So, but a lot of these kind of older varieties like this, it doesn't matter if they're photosynthesizing or not, they'll have glycoalkaloids in them. So if you're lucky enough to ever be in Peru and go to one of these markets and buy weird potatoes, they often will be sold alongside this clay. And so you'll slice them, soak them in this clay, and it pulls out the glycoalkaloids, and you can cook them and eat them. So that's what that's for. This fueled Incan soldiers who ruled the Andes before European contact. And in Peru, conquistadors from Spain were looking for gold and silver, and they found potatoes, which is way more valuable than any of the gold or silver that they would have found, because it fed more people. This is a crop that if it was not found and spread across the world, there were literally less of us on Earth, especially if some of you have Irish ancestry, which we'll get into. Per acre, you can grow four times more calories than grain, and you don't have to process it. You pull it out of the ground, you knock the dirt off of it, throw it under a ship, and get underway. You don't have to, separate the chaff and grind it and make sure it doesn't get wet and all this stuff. It's much more easy to store. Plus, with that right there, if you grind something into flour, you can't grow it again. These grow ears, and you can throw them in the ground. Eyes, you can throw them in the ground, and they'll grow again. So. Before potatoes, European living standards were very impoverished. So after a Columbian exchange, or later, it wasn't actually on that first time that they were discovered, that Europe was like current day Bangladesh now. So where there was like some very rich people and a whole lot of poor people, and not very much middle class, not a very big middle class. So Europe was very impoverished just because food was hard to grow, the season's really short there, and it wasn't very efficient. You could have one bad harvest and wipe everybody out. They were eating mostly barley, oh Lord. Because you can't, barley doesn't have that much gluten, you can't make like buff, beautiful bread out of it. Rye and barley were primarily what they were growing in Central and Northern Europe, because the season wasn't very long and it can handle poor soils. Whereas like wheat was in the Fertile Crescent, Northern Africa, and then the south of the North Mediterranean area. Okay, so generally speaking, potatoes were not really well accepted in Europe. Everybody, they thought they were the devil, and because poor people would eat them. So Irish took it up real quick. The Irish were an occupied community since the 12th century. Like they were absolutely occupied by the British and subjugated. They were Catholic, and the ruling class were Protestants. Some of you know a lot more about this. I couldn't believe it. I never even heard of this because I did not grow up in a ton of religion. My mom switched religions like every other month just to try things on. So we went to a bunch of churches and stuff and never stuck with one. But I didn't know that Catholics and Protestants truly did hate each other until I started taking high school history. And then when I started bartending in college, I remember offering some kind of whiskey to somebody, and they were like, the Protestant whiskey. It was Bushmills versus, I can't remember the other one. But they're both kind of terrible whiskey. Don't be offended. I didn't mean to yuck your yum, but it's not like Kentucky bourbon, all right? And it's a couple of blended whiskeys, and one was Protestant and one, I don't know. But people love it, and they're very into it. And I don't mean to yuck your yum if you're all into, there's Bushmills and another one, I can't remember. Bushmills was the Protestant one.
Where did you live?
Huh?
Where did you live?
Arizona. There's not.
Okay.
No, in Arizona, there's not churches on every corner, and everything's real mixed. It's so close to.
When you bartended, that person had that issue, it's still in Arizona.
Oh yeah, definitely. Arizona. There are very few people from Arizona. It's like a westward expansion kind of place, and it's real close to California. So people sooner talk about their sexual orientation than their church. You would not out a Christian basically there. So coming here, I was like, what? It was weird. Some of the terminology. People were like, look at God. I'm like, where? What do you mean? I didn't get it. Now I'm like, oh, bless her heart. I'm much more. It was just kind of yeah. So yeah. Sorry, anybody, if you're Christian out there in this recording, I didn't mean to offend you. Okay, moving on. All right, so English farmers associated with Catholicism. So English was like, no, we're not eating it, but you poor Irish people can have them. France again didn't want to eat them either until they had flour wars, which the French even today, they love their bread. And so they adopted the potato because they had to, and it was much more efficient again to grow potatoes than it was to grow grain. Catherine the Great, she was a big change agent. The Orthodox Church was against her. There was no way that they were going to accept potatoes because they didn't really, they were really kind of undermining her as a leader. And really, because the adoption of the potato in Europe and the massive explosion in population there, and the fact that you could put them on ships and truck a long time, and they had all the essential amino acids that you needed, and vitamin C, and all kinds of things that you actually needed that wheat did not give you, it actually allowed Europe to assert dominance over the world. So there's a lot of foods that are kind of hidden in our history as to why people survived or people dominated, or I talked about this the other day, New York City, one of the reasons that New York City is because immigrants could come through there and you could be poor and own nothing but the clothes on your back, and the bay, the New York harbor was full of oysters, and you could go there, eat 10 or 12 oysters, and live to fight another day. It prevented starvation, and it was very high quality protein. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a lot of our ancestors in this room that came through Ellis Island. That's how they survived. You know, if you were like a street tough trying to just make it, you could survive off of oysters. But a lot of people don't know that. You know, there's all of these kind of secrets in our food system of, it really had to do with why we lasted as long as we did. So, potatoes are cultivated as clones, even most of the ones we eat here. I could go on for a whole 3 hours about different clones in our food system that were like teetering on collapse. Look up the Cavendish banana, the lovely, boring banana that we eat. The Cavendish banana, I worked on a banana farm for a few months and ate like 20 or 30 different varieties of bananas, so to me the Cavendish is dead to me. But that banana that we eat in the grocery store that's very cheap and available is being wiped out right now by a fungus, and they are fighting against as fast as they can. This happened earlier. Some of your parents and grandparents grew up on the Gros Michel banana, and that one also got wiped out by the same fungus, and now it's happening to the Cavendish banana. Anyway, that's why monocropping is bad. One thing can wipe everything out. So thanks to Peru, they have all of these like, there's a lot of places that have these pride crops, like Mexico with corn, Peru with potatoes, and it's so part of their culture and their pride that they basically have like a bank of genetic information that we can pull from when we eventually wipe out the stuff we have. Okay, Irish potato famine, we've all heard about it. For those of you, if you look back in your family's history, if you've done Ancestry.com, and you find out like, oh, grandma and grandpa so-and-so, William, came over from, and you don't know why they came over in the 1850s, they may have been running from this very famine. So there were multiple waves of this famine where they had, everybody was eating, an adult person would survive on basically about 10 pounds of potatoes a day, usually with butter and milk, and that would give you all of your essential amino acids. It would give you, so essential amino acids, it would give you most of the vitamins and minerals that you needed, and you could literally survive on it, where you couldn't do that with wheat or rye or something like that. Plus that you didn't have to do much to it. You pull it out of the ground, knock the dirt off of it, throw it in boiling water, and you've got dinner. So it was super efficient, and on like 1.5 acres of land, you could feed like a large family for an entire year. So in that really short summer growing season, you could feed everybody. This Phytophthora infestans came through, wiped out the crop. What little did survive, because Ireland was an occupied territory by the British, they took those good ones and exported them for money for the crown. And these people, I mean, starving is a terrible, terrible death. It wasn't like a disease that knocks you out in a couple of days, or the plague that would take you out in a week. They suffered and suffered and suffered. And so many people ran for the hills that if you have, like, if you're from Boston and your family comes from, like, you know, cops or firefighters or whatever, any of those, like, union jobs that were dominated by Irish people, and they left about this time, if you have anybody alive or any kind of history in your family, I'd look into it, because they probably jumped ship because of this. And there were more people that left at that time, that more people left than survived. And so Ireland was wiped out. There was just nobody there. People of working age were just gone. They either died or they came to the US or anywhere else. Canada was another big receiver of Ireland. So in this, this is a memorial that they have in Ireland for that specifically. This came from the Smithsonian. So really, really interesting. Could do like an hour talk on this alone. Okay, so growing potatoes, super fun. A lot of people don't. Okay, you need long sunny days in loose soil. If you're a doomsday prepper, which my friends and family used to make fun of me that I was until COVID happened and nobody makes fun of me anymore. But because I'm like, we must grow everything, and like I have my seed bank ready to go with my passport if I ever need it. That goes with me. So, my friend actually, unfortunately, bless her, had to go through a divorce, and she called me. She's like, I'm leaving my husband. I'm like, where's your seed bank? She's like, it's in the car. I'm like, great. It was like the first thing I asked her, because she has some of like the rarest, coolest knew she had her dog. I didn't have to ask about that. I'm like, girl, don't forget your seed bank. But she is like the greenest thumbs. She used to be a master gardener here, but she's since moved to Florida. Anyway, so you can actually save, if you find a potato that you love and is so delicious, you can save some of them, keep them in a cool, dry place until they start to grow eyes, and then you can actually grow these. You would basically, there's a couple of eyes on them, you cut them so there's 1 or 2 eyes in pieces about this big, and then you let them dry for a day or 2, and then you plant them in the ground, and the potatoes are going to grow up above them. They're not really going to grow below them, just so you know that. Determinate varieties are early varieties, and so they grow, and the potatoes kind of grow in one little plane, and the plants don't get very big. The most ones you read about are the late varieties, where you bury them deep in a trench, and then they grow a little and you bury them, and you grow a little and you bury them, and you keep doing that because more roots will come out of the stems. I didn't talk about this during tomatoes, but when you plant tomatoes, you do the same thing with an indeterminate tomato. If you get an indeterminate tomato, it's this big, you tear off all the leaves except for the top ones and bury it in a trench, because when the stem is buried, it will put off more roots. So, but again, see me if you've never planted tomatoes before, we'll talk about it. So if you wait for the plant to yellow, just like every other plant that's kind of going into fall, that's why fall leaves turn all those beautiful colors. It's pulling all of the energy and sugars down out of the leaves and down into the roots for the winter, and that is what this is doing too. So you can wait till it flowers. You can even, some people will, there's a straw method that you can do where you bury them with straw, and then you can kind of clear the straw away and pick out clean potatoes to cook a little. So I've done that before, that's pretty fun. Okay, aubergine. I'm gonna crank through a little more because you have a break in 10 minutes, right? Great. Aubergine, eggplant, old world, totally amazing. I don't know how it got there. So these basically float all over the world. I won't go deep into this. This is, some people love, 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 love eggplant. It depends on what you grew up with. I don't mind like these little small sweet little eggplants, I don't mind them, but those big black beauty eggplants, to me, I'm like, I'll buy them and cook them for people, or if someone gives me a case of eggplants and they're like, do a cooking class, I can make them delicious, but I won't go to the grocery store and ever buy one unless it's for someone that loves them, because it's just not my favorite one. But some people absolutely love these. I don't want to yuck anybody's yum, but there are way more delicious and better ones than those big seedy ones. You can get like little tiny ones that are really tender and easy to cook and are not so like watery when you cook them. There's the little dwarf varieties, big tall varieties, but mainly we call them eggplant because there were little white fruit when the British occupied India. These little egg-shaped ones that were white were the most popular ones. So, but they've been around for thousands of years. People have been cultivating these. You know if you have one that is like a landrace or is a little bit older because it's thorny, like these were covered in thorns, and we've bred for them to have the thorns out of, coming off of them. You'll know though, there's still some that are sort of vestigial. If you pick it and you try to peel off that top, it might cut you or bite you. That's like its little thing that it saved over time. So we won't go too much to this. These are much more disease resistant. These are some beautiful old photos of, I'm not photos, but art, from like 1300s, 18th century in Japan, Chinese eggplant from 1330s, just poems written about them, all that kind of thing. In the Renaissance, these everybody, at the time thought that they would like make you flirtatious, and I love reading about all of the thoughts that people had about certain fruits and vegetables and how they would have like make you like swoon or out of control or tear at your bosoms or things like that over like eggplant. I'm like, they taste it? I don't know. For me, I mean, a potato sometimes makes me feel like that, but like an eggplant. But that's just me. Just me. I don't want to yuck your yum. I will show you. I'll show you how to grow these. They're very easy to grow if you're going to do a solanaceous crop. This is the way to go. So disease resistant in the Piedmont for the most part. Like you might see this. I'll get calls about this. Something's eating my eggplant. I'm like, it doesn't. It's a flea beetle. It doesn't touch the fruit. That's the only thing I've really seen on eggplant here. Occasionally blight, but not really. Just give them enough space. They're gorgeous. They put off a ton of fruit. I'll grow one in my garden if like there's a dwarf left over from a plant sale or something like that, just to give them away to friends. Because I love to like walk down my street. I have a little radio flyer wagon, and I'll walk to my immediate like 10 neighbors, and they're like, oh, Cheralyn's coming with her wagon, and then I'll like take some stuff. And people love the eggplants, but I grow them because they're easy. I just throw them in there and people love them. So well-drained and fertile soil. Older varieties are thorny. We talked about that. They grow about 3-4 feet tall, but you can get itty bitties. Some of them even get like big. So if you come to Briggs, if you've ever met Catherine Hamilton, she always grows like a variety of really beautiful eggplants. The Italian eggplants to me are like, they look like art. They're so gorgeous. Because there's not just that big purple one. There's green ones and yellow ones and ones with a blue hue and white ones and ones that grow this tall with teeny tiny Hansel and Gretel fruit on them. So just the genetic diversity is really beautiful. Okay, let's get into corn. We got 10 more minutes until the next thing. Corn. Again, this is the thing that has support, out of all the other plants, the one that we really talked about supporting armies and supporting people, are the things that are starchy and have a lot of calories, and that's potatoes. Corn is another one. We talked about wheat a little bit. Those are the things that people gather and grow societies around, because those are starches. Those are a lot of carbohydrates. You would have to eat 50 peppers to give you the calories of a plate full of potatoes. So, corn is another one that societies were built around because of the starchiness and the protein and oil content of corn. But look at that diversity of corn. Mexico, they are the people of the corn. That is their thing, and it is so beautiful, the diversity of it. They also have massive seed banks full of corn that will probably end up saving humanity, because we are monocropping corn left, right, and center. And when we think about corn, we think of like the sweet, delicious, sweet corn. But corn and soybeans are basically not only animal feed, so lots of us eat corn in the form of animal products, because that's primarily where all of it goes. And also corn and soybeans can be broken apart into fat, protein, and starch, and then reformatted into every kind of snack product you can imagine. So think of like you walk down the snack aisle, and just when you turn it over, it will be mostly corn and soybeans, but it's not like they took a corn and a soybean and they like ground it up and mixed it together. They take it out into individual parts. And a lot of the chemical names that you see, like hydroxymethylcellulose and things like that, are like, I'm trying to think of the stuff that they coat shredded cheese in, dextrose, things like that. Those are usually that's an ingredient that you can't buy in the grocery store. You can't walk in and say, I would like some hydroxymethylcellulose and some dextrose. That's an ingredient that you get from like a chemical plant, but they make it into food, but it comes from corn and soybeans. They break it apart into parts, and they put it back together into chips and Takis and like all the different things that are delicious and last forever on the shelf. So anyway, I'm not here to yuck anybody's yum. I love a Dorito a couple times a year. As long as you don't make it your dominant source of food, you're great. But these get turned into edible food-like products. But that's a whole other topic. Okay. That's not my term. That was Michael Pollan. He said edible food-like products, like a Twinkie or sorry for the brand names. I'm not trying to get in trouble talking to whoever's watching this in the future. Cake bars or, whatever you want to call them, processed foods. Michael Pollan calls them edible food-like products. And it's like an edible toy, kind of. If you look at it like that, you got to do your homework sometimes. You can't always play with toys, but playing with toys sometimes is nice. So, okay. So Mesoamerican agriculture, from that original one where you just saw all of Mexico and Central America, a development of an agricultural development center. They really did slow down and create cities pretty early on. So it was domesticated 9,000 years ago from teosinte, which is this little guy. It was this grass. Even the corn we have today, these are ancient corns, but like that big, bodacious, delicious sweet corn is the largest grass in the world. When you see that like long, like you've learned probably the difference between monocots and dicots, it's one of the biggest it's a big grass, and that's the seed pod for grass. All of our grains are grasses, rice, corn, wheat, rye, barley. Those are all grasses. So you break these off and you stick it in the ground and a grass will grow. It just so happens to be that we've developed it to be the largest grass in the world. So this was a grass, people would come along, snack on these, and then they got it to grow. This is maize, but teosinte was this itty bitty little guy, and we would collect these and then, maybe hold them because they were a transport molecule, molecules that you could stick in your little bag, carry along with you, stop and cook some of it if you were still a hunter-gatherer and you're moving along following animals for food, or going to fish for that time, or whatever your coming and going was. You could pick these up along the way. They dried and stored well, and you could cook them and eat them and even plant them along your way, so every time you come back and forth, you're picking them up as you go. And then we selected bigger ones and bigger ones and bigger ones, and basically developed this teosinte into the corn that we know today. So let's go back to that. So then here's all the like kind of funny story of things. Like, so Olmec and Mai developed nixtamalization, which we'll talk about in just a second. When Europeans got a hold of it, they would not use it in communion because wheat is an old world crop, and transmogrification, is that the name of it? What is it? Trans-somethingrification? I'm not a religious person. Basically, when you take the cracker and the priest bless it and it's the body of Christ, they couldn't use that because it was corn, it had to be wheat. So they had to ship wheat in to make that happen, especially when they were converting all these people to Christianity. So people didn't want to eat it because they were afraid to be Indian. There's always this fear of new foods, just like potatoes. Europeans thought they would, that it was like grown by devils because it came out of the ground, and it wasn't until necessity that they had to eat it. It was the same thing with corn. So there's just a lot of mistrust with it, and it always started with the lower classes that were like, oh, this tastes great and it's a lot less work to grow it, and you get a lot more out of the acreage that you have. You get a lot more calories out of it than if you grew wheat or barley. So yeah, 2 to 3 times the calories of wheat. This is on the same land. So right now, corn is grown more across the world than any other crop. We use it for silage, which is basically, we cut up all because it's the largest grass in the world, we cut up all of the stalk, we mix it with the grain, and if you've ever seen a concentrated animal feeding operation, they'll have these big, huge piles of this stuff covered in plastic, and it's like pre-fermenting, so that then the cows can eat it, and it's pre-fermented, so it's more easily digestible in their rumen, and it's higher calorie because it's got corn in it in larger amounts than them just eating grass. We also make ethanol out of it, food out of it, oil out of it, plastics, ethanol that goes into your car when it's like up to 10% ethanol when you fill up your gas, corn. So corn is all over the world. Right now, Mexico has been in a legal fight because they wanted to reject GMO corn. And GMOs are controversial. The one thing that is most controversial about GMO corn specifically is that GMO grasses are made so that you can hose them with glyphosate, and it will kill everything around the corn or the grain that you're looking for and won't kill that plant. And so you end up consuming a lot of glyphosate. There's glyphosate residues in foodstuffs. So that's the major argument against using that, and corporate behavior of people who control GMOs, but that's enough talk for another time. So monocropping is really dangerous because one sickness can wipe everything out. Think of the potatoes. And so Mexico recently rejected GMOs and was sued for it. Okay, we talked about that. Okay, nixtamalization. All right, let's talk about this really quick. Okay. Nixtamalization. All right, so the Aztecs figured this out, quite possibly. We don't know, but quite possibly they did. So you cook the maize kernels, and you guys have all had nixtamalized corn before, you just may not know it. So if you've had look at this word, nixtamalization, tamale, if you've had a tamale, if you've had a tortilla chip, not a corn chip, a tortilla chip, if you've had a corn tortilla, you've had nixtamalized corn, okay? And what that is you take corn, field corn, not sweet corn. You take field corn or dent corn, the stuff that we feed animals, okay? And you soak it in potassium or calcium hydroxide. They used to use wood ash. Wood ash is very alkaline, which is why you don't put it all over. My husband used to put all of our wood ash in the compost, and I'm like, please don't do that. It's like lime. Anyway, so you soak it, and this outer part, the pericarp, if you've ever seen like a piece of corn, like hominy, they take it and they soak it in wood ash back in the day, or now they have, potassium and calcium hydroxide, and it dissolves that. It gets all slimy, you boil it, then you soak it in there overnight, and then this sloughs off and makes the liquid all kind of thick. And then you've got the germ, where This is where the word germination comes from. That's where your DNA is. It's protected by a little pocket of vitamin E oil to keep it from unraveling and causing problems. And then this is the endosperm that's all pure energy, pure carbohydrates. And then you grind this up, okay? So if you've ever made cornbread, which a lot of you Southerners have, that's not nixtamalized corn. That still has the pericarp on it, and you just grind it up into flour, mix it with, you know, white wheat flour if you want, and buttermilk and eggs and stuff like that, and you make this like buff little cake. This is not nixtamalized, okay? Because it can't make a dough. If you try to make a dough out of this, it kind of falls apart. But this makes a dough. It's like soft and pliable and mushy, and you can press it into tortillas. And so you make tortilla chips, you make hominy that's in a can that you put in menudo or pozole. That's all nixtamalized corn. And what it does is it liberates a niacin molecule, which is a B vitamin. And the B vitamin is in here, but it's locked up protein-wise within this endosperm. And when you eat it, it would pass right through you if you were eating it just as ground corn. But if you nixtamalize it, it liberates that molecule of niacin, you consume it, and then you have more nutrients available to you. And if you use calcium hydroxide, these are actually rich in calcium for those of us of a certain age that are trying to prevent osteoporosis. Then eating corn tortillas is something that will be rich in calcium because of the way that you have processed it. So just so you know, nixtamalization, very important, and it just made things more nutritious for developing, or not developing, but long ago cultures. Let's see, okay, we're getting close to there. Okay, let me do this and then we're gonna move on, you're gonna go get a snack. Okay, so plants in a block, because it's not pollinated by bees, it's wind pollinated, which is why when you drive by in Nebraska and there's miles and miles and miles and miles of corn and it's all planted in a block. So if you have enough room, plant it in a block. If you must have corn and you only have a row of it, you have to go out and hand pollinate it, where you come and you break off the tassel and you hit it all over the silks. The little silks that you peel off when you do corn, each one of those goes to one kernel of corn. And so you can tell there's bad pollination with corn. If you peel it back and there's like chunks missing, pollen did not land on each one of those silks. So consider the F1 varieties, these hybrid varieties, for sweetness. Earworms. The reason we don't grow corn at Briggs is because you don't get too much calories per square foot with corn. You need a lot of space for it. And this little worm is also a tomato fruit worm. So we don't grow corn at Briggs. It's just not worth it. And so tomato fruit worm, very sad. I don't recommend it. And you know, usually speaking, you know if you have GMO corn, if you open this up and it's not cut off and it's perfect all the way to the tip. Generally speaking, that doesn't mean necessarily always, but because this guy gets in there and he's all protected, so spraying is kind of difficult. If you have perfect corn, this guy, that's what BT corn is, Bacillus thuringiensis corn. That was a big controversial because BT is a bacteria from soil that we spray all over in organic gardening. You know, because if a chewing pest chews it, it'll disrupt its digestion and it dies. But if you take BT and you kind of weave it into the genetics of corn and this guy lands on there and starts eating it, it'll just die because BT is part of the corn now. So that was really controversial for people. Anyway, so I just wanted to, it's one of the three sisters, which we'll get into when you get back. And that is where you have a beautiful stalk of corn, or many stalks of corn, and you have pole beans that grow up the pole of corn, and you have squash growing at the base, and they all serve different functions for each other. And my last little thing is, if you ever get a chance to eat huitlacoche, also called corn smut, which is a terrible name. Huitlacoche sounds a lot better. This is like a delicious mushroom, and often this makes your corn worth like 10, 20 times the amount because this is a delicacy. It's like a delicious mushroom. They call them, I think corn truffles are a much better name because that's what it's like. It's like a corn truffle. It's like very rich in protein. Anyway, go have a snack and come right back.